Let me ask you something straight up. When was the last time you pulled back? Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Most of us spend our lives showing up for everyone else. We answer the calls, reply to the messages, explain ourselves over and over, bend, stretch, overextend, just to keep the peace, just to be liked, just to avoid feeling guilty, and somewhere in that chaos, we disappear. Not all at once, slowly, quietly, piece by piece, we trade our presence for acceptance. We confuse constant availability with love. We think if we're always there, they'll finally see us, appreciate us, choose us, but here's the truth nobody tells you. Being seen has nothing to do with how often you show up for others, and everything to do with how you show up for yourself. This is not about playing games. This is not about ghosting or being passive-aggressive. This is about understanding one simple truth. Your absence can do what your presence never could. Sometimes, the only way people learn your value is when they no longer have access to it. Sometimes, the clearest message is the one you don't send. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. Today, I'm not here to teach you how to be louder. I'm here to remind you how powerful you are when you stop over-explaining, over-giving, and overstaying. This is let them feel your absence, not because you're angry, but because you're awake. Are you ready? There comes a moment when saying nothing becomes more powerful than saying everything. When you reach that point where your presence has been taken for granted, your voice has been drowned out, or your value consistently overlooked, that's when silence becomes your sharpest weapon. People think that confrontation is the answer. That yelling, crying, pleading, texting back in all caps, or calling one more time will finally make someone understand. But what if I told you that your absence, the sound of you not explaining, not chasing, not arguing, is what actually cuts through the noise? Because here's the truth. People don't truly hear you until they can no longer access you. When you remove yourself from spaces that no longer appreciate your voice, you stop wasting energy on proving your worth. You stop auditioning for roles in other people's lives that they never planned to cast you in. You start realizing that your silence is not weakness. It's self-respect, and self-respect doesn't scream, it walks. Quietly, decisively, unapologetically. You don't have to tell anyone you're gone. You just stop showing up in the ways they expect, and they will feel it. Not today, maybe, but they will. People will start to notice the shift, not because you announced it, but because your silence disrupts their pattern. They were used to you answering every call, responding to every message, explaining yourself, showing up even when it hurt. When you go silent, you break that pattern. And in that rupture, you give people space to recognize the impact of your presence. Because now it's gone. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow, what you reinforce, and what you stop responding to. Silence is how you stop responding. There's power in knowing that you don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your peace. You don't have to justify pulling away from people who only value your proximity when it benefits them. Sometimes the most strategic thing you can do is remove your presence so people have to sit with their own behavior. Let them feel your absence, not as a punishment, but as a reflection, a mirror. Let them notice what they dismissed when it was right in front of them. Let them sit in the emptiness created by your boundaries. And this isn't about playing games. It's not about manipulation. It's about alignment. Your energy is too expensive to keep spending on people who are emotionally bankrupt. You deserve reciprocity, not residue. If your presence doesn't shift the room, your absence will. Because when someone is used to consuming you endlessly without consequence, your silence is the first time they realize they were overdrawing from a bank that finally closed. Silence also gives you clarity. It helps you process without being pulled into another cycle of miscommunication, gaslighting, or guilt. You reclaim your time. You rebuild your voice within yourself instead of trying to be heard by people who aren't listening. You stop fighting battles that aren't even worth the emotional debt they create. And once you taste that peace, once you feel the power of not responding, not chasing, not explaining, You start to see how much you've been giving away just to feel temporarily seen. And don't be surprised when your silence makes people uncomfortable. That discomfort isn't your problem to solve. That's growth. That's what happens when you stop overfunctioning in relationships that thrive on your self-abandonment. You're not being cold, you're being clear. You're not being distant, you're being deliberate. You're not being petty, you're protecting your power. And that silence, it's louder than anything you could possibly say. You are not required to show up for people who never show up for you. You don't owe access to people who have misused it. And you are absolutely allowed to pull back without giving anyone a heads up. Let them wonder. Let them feel the shift. Let them realize what it means to lose your presence. Not because you hate them, but because you finally loved yourself enough to leave the room without a speech, without a fight, without noise. Every single day, you wake up with a limited amount of energy, physical, emotional, mental. It's like money in your bank account. You don't get an endless supply, and once it's spent, it's gone. But the problem is, most of us go through life like we're printing our own currency, giving away our energy like it costs nothing, as if we won't feel the loss later. You give your time, your attention, your presence, your emotional labor to people and situations that drain you, and then wonder why you're exhausted, resentful, anxious, and stretched too thin to even focus on yourself. You need to start treating your energy like it matters, because it does. It's your life force. It's what drives everything, your goals, your health, your relationships. If you don't protect it, no one else will. Think about it. You wouldn't hand your credit card to a stranger and say, "Go wild." But you do that with your energy all the time. You give people your emotional availability without limits. You answer calls that you know will end in stress. You let guilt make decisions for you. You show up for people who would never do the same for you. And why? Because somewhere along the way, you were conditioned to believe that being available makes you valuable. That saying yes means you're kind. That self-sacrifice is noble. But none of that is true. Being drained is not a badge of honor. It's a red flag. You're spending more than you have, and there is a cost. The truth is, not everyone deserves access to you. Not every situation requires your response. Not every request is worth your energy. You have to get real about what you're allowing. Because every time you say yes to something that doesn't align with your values or your peace, you're saying no to something that could. That's the trade. Every distraction, every toxic conversation, every obligation done out of guilt, that's energy gone. Spent, wasted, you don't get it back. Start asking yourself, is this worth my energy? Is this conversation helping me grow, or is it dragging me down? Is this person respecting my boundaries, or are they just used to me not having any? Am I doing this because it serves me, or because I'm afraid of what someone will think if I don't? These are not easy questions, but if you don't ask them, you'll keep leaking energy into things that don't serve you, and wonder why you feel so empty. You need to treat your energy the same way you'd treat money if you were on a tight budget, because you are. Emotional bandwidth isn't infinite. Time isn't infinite. Your peace isn't either. So start investing in what gives you a return. People who lift you, not drain you. Work that inspires you, not crushes your spirit. Habits that restore you, not numb you. Conversations that nourish you, not feed your anxiety. Be deliberate. Be ruthless. Be clear. And that includes walking away from anything that doesn't respect your energy. Just like you'd leave a store where the prices are a rip-off, you need to leave situations that consistently cost more than they give. Stop giving unlimited emotional overdraft protection to people who are reckless with your time and heart. If they haven't earned your trust, stop handing them your energy like it's free, because it's not. It's expensive, and it's yours. There's nothing selfish about protecting your energy. In fact, it's one of the most selfless things you can do. Because when you preserve your energy, you become a better partner, a better friend, a better parent, a better creator. You stop operating from burnout and start showing up from alignment. You stop reacting to life and start creating it. You begin to live intentionally, and that changes everything. Remember, just because someone asks doesn't mean you have to give. Just because it's urgent doesn't mean it's important. And just because you can doesn't mean you should. Every time you say yes, you're spending energy. Make sure it's worth it. There's a lot of misunderstanding around boundaries. People think that setting a boundary is about pushing others away, shutting people out, being cold, distant, rude, or unavailable. But that's not what boundaries are. Boundaries are not walls. They're not designed to isolate you. They're not weapons to punish people. They are filters, tools that help you protect your energy, your time, your values, and your emotional well-being. A boundary isn't about rejecting connection. It's about choosing healthy connection. When you set a boundary, you're not saying, "I don't want you in my life." You're saying, "I want you in my life, but not at the cost of myself." That's a massive difference. And if someone hears your boundary and takes it personally, that says more about them than it does about you. Because people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always see them as a threat. But people who truly value you will understand that a boundary isn't a rejection. It's a condition for healthy relationship. Think about a filter. It lets the good through and keeps the harmful stuff out. That's what boundaries do. They let in respect, care, reciprocity, and emotional safety. And they keep out manipulation, guilt, tripping, overstepping, and toxicity. If you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling drained, minimized, or like you were talked over or used, chances are a boundary was missing or violated. The absence of boundaries doesn't create connection. It creates resentment. Most of us weren't taught how to set boundaries. We were taught to be nice, to be accommodating, to avoid conflict. We were taught that love means sacrifice, that being liked means saying yes, that being a good friend, child, partner, or colleague means putting others first. But being endlessly available isn't noble, it's destructive. Because every time you ignore your own needs to keep the peace, you build internal war. You chip away at your own self-worth. You betray yourself a little more. Setting a boundary is not an act of aggression. It's an act of self-awareness. It says, "I know what I need to stay mentally healthy. I know what's okay with me and what's not." And when you do that, you don't just honor yourself. You teach others how to treat you. You create clarity. People know where they stand. They know what you will and won't accept. That makes relationships stronger, not weaker. It's important to remember that setting a boundary is not about controlling others. You're not responsible for their reactions. You're only responsible for your truth. If someone crosses your boundary, that's not your cue to explain it again and again until they understand. That's your cue to enforce it. A boundary without enforcement is just a suggestion, and people don't respect suggestions. They respect standards. Boundaries also help you regulate your energy. You stop saying yes when you mean no. You stop taking responsibility for other people's feelings. You stop participating in conversations that go nowhere. You stop trying to rescue, fix, or overfunction. You learn to let people sit with their own discomfort without making it your job to soften the blow. You learn that it's not your job to be emotionally available 24/7. You are not an unlimited resource. And here's the thing, boundaries don't make things more complicated. They make them simpler. You stop second-guessing yourself. You stop internalizing guilt. You stop replaying situations in your head, wondering if you did the right thing because you know you did. You protected your peace. You spoke your truth. You honored your limits. And that is not something to apologize for. That is something to be proud of. You may lose people when you start setting boundaries. Let them go. Anyone who requires you to shrink yourself to stay in their life is not offering you love. They're offering control. You may feel lonely at first. That's normal. You're detoxing from codependency. You're retraining your nervous system. You're stepping into a new version of yourself. One that doesn't trade authenticity for acceptance. One that doesn't confuse people, pleasing with connection. Boundaries are a form of clarity. A filter that keeps the healthy in and the harmful out. They're not about isolation. They're about intention. They're not about control. They're about self-respect. And when you start using that filter consistently, your life begins to change. not because others changed, but because you did. Just because someone is close to you doesn't mean they're good for you. Proximity can create the illusion of connection, but closeness isn't proof of loyalty, love, or alignment. We confuse access with importance all the time. We assume that because someone is physically nearby, emotionally familiar, or part of our inner circle, that they are for us. But being near you isn't the same as being good to you. Presence does not automatically equal support. Think about your daily life. How many people do you keep close just because they've always been there? Because they're family, because you've known them for years, because you work together, because cutting ties feels wrong or scary or dramatic. But history doesn't guarantee harmony. Longevity doesn't mean someone values you. You can spend years with people who don't celebrate your growth, who don't respect your voice, who make you feel smaller the closer you get. That's not connection. That's proximity wearing a mask. The truth is, some of the most draining relationships you'll ever have are with the people sitting right next to you. And some of the most affirming connections you'll experience might come from people you've just met. You have to stop measuring value by time served. Stop assuming that just because someone has stayed, they care. People stay in proximity for a lot of reasons: comfort, convenience, control, but that doesn't mean they uplift you. That doesn't mean they add value to your life. You've got to start evaluating your relationships based on energy, not geography. Who challenges you to grow? Who listens when you speak? Who respects your boundaries, your goals, your truth? Who shows up consistently, not just when it's easy, but when it's inconvenient? That's value. That's alignment. And sometimes the people closest to you resent your evolution the most, because your growth reminds them of their own stagnation. We hold onto proximity out of guilt, out of fear, out of obligation. But if the people near you constantly question your worth, undermine your goals, or weaponize your vulnerability, that's not support. That's sabotage. And the longer you allow that dynamic, the more you internalize the idea that you have to tolerate disrespect to avoid discomfort. But you don't. You are allowed to outgrow people. You are allowed to create distance. You are allowed to value peace over familiarity. When you confuse proximity for value, you stop making conscious choices about who gets access to you. You let people in by default, not by design. You forget that you are allowed to curate your circle, that you are the gatekeeper of your own energy. You start tolerating patterns you'd never accept from strangers, just because someone is family, or a childhood friend, or a longtime partner. But being known isn't the same as being respected. Being around isn't the same as being for you. Let's be real. Some people stay close just to keep tabs, to compare, to subtly compete, to keep you from rising too far above what they're comfortable with. That's not love. That's control in disguise. You need to be brave enough to name what's actually happening, to see who's clapping when you win, and who's going silent, who's giving you honest feedback, and who's quietly hoping you fail. That clarity doesn't come from proximity. It comes from perspective. And you only get that when you start questioning what you've been tolerating. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is create distance from people who are physically close but emotionally toxic. You can love someone and still recognize that their behavior is not healthy. You can care about someone and still choose to limit their access. And if someone only values you when you're small, quiet, or convenient, that's not love. That's conditional tolerance. That's proximity, not value. Don't be afraid to rearrange your life based on how people show up, not just how long they've been around. Don't confuse consistency with commitment. And don't assume someone's role in your past earns them a place in your future. Start choosing people based on how they treat you, how they speak to you, how they energize you. That's what matters. That's what determines value. Not the miles, the memories, or the labels, but the energy, the effort, and the alignment. People assume that when you pull back, when you take space, stop texting, stop showing up, stop explaining, that you're creating distance, that you're disconnecting, avoiding being cold. But what they miss is this: absence doesn't just create space, it creates perspective. When you're always present, always available, always involved, people stop seeing you clearly. Your presence becomes background noise. Your contributions get taken for granted. Your effort fades into routine. But when you step away, when you pause, go quiet, withdraw with intention, that's when people finally see you. That's when clarity sets in. When you're constantly in the picture, people focus on the frame. They stop appreciating the details, the effort, the value of who you are. They grow accustomed to your presence and start mistaking consistency for permanence. That's how you end up overlooked, underappreciated, and emotionally depleted. You start asking yourself, why am I the only one putting in the effort? Or why does no one notice what I bring to the table? But the truth is, you're too close to be seen clearly, and that's where absence becomes powerful. Absence isn't abandonment, it's recalibration. It's the decision to stop pouring into something that isn't pouring back. It's the pause that allows both sides to evaluate what's real and what's just routine. You need distance to gain clarity about your relationships, your value, your limits. Sometimes you have to step back to see who steps forward. That distance reveals everything: who checks in, who takes you for granted, who assumes you'll come back no matter how they treat you. Absence doesn't lie, it exposes. There's a certain wisdom in disappearing for a while, not in a dramatic, manipulative way, but in a grounded, intentional way. You go quiet to hear yourself think. You withdraw to see things from the outside. You stop giving endlessly so you can finally ask, what do I need? Because when you're always responding to the needs of others, you forget to check in with your own. That's how burnout happens. That's how resentment builds. That's how you lose yourself in the noise of everyone else's expectations. The clarity you gain in absence is priceless. You begin to recognize who truly values you, not by what they say when you're around, but by what they do when you're not. You learn the difference between people who genuinely miss your presence and people who just miss the access. It becomes painfully obvious who appreciated you and who merely consumed you. And that truth is hard, but it's also freeing, because now you know. Now you can choose differently. Absence isn't about making others feel your loss. It's about remembering your own value. It's about reclaiming space in your own life. It's about stepping out of cycles that don't serve you. You're not punishing anyone by pulling back. You're preserving yourself. You're creating room to breathe, to reflect, to redirect your energy. You're honoring the fact that you don't have to be everywhere for everyone all the time. That's not selfish. That's sustainable. Some people will misunderstand your silence. Let them. You don't owe everyone an explanation. If someone is confused by your absence, maybe they never paid attention to your presence in the first place. You're not here to constantly prove your worth to people who were never looking closely to begin with. You're here to be in alignment with your peace, your priorities, your purpose, and sometimes alignment requires separation. Sometimes the clearest insight comes from stepping away. Taking space doesn't mean you're giving up on people. It means you're giving up on patterns that drained you. It means you're choosing to no longer participate in dynamics that made you feel small. And if someone is meant to be in your life, they'll meet you where you are. They'll feel the shift and make adjustments. If they don't, that's information. Absence doesn't create distance, it reveals it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Clarity doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the stillness of your own absence. When you stop talking, stop chasing, stop proving, and start observing, that's where the truth lies. That's where alignment begins. That's when you remember, you are not defined by your availability. You are defined by your values, your boundaries, your energy. And the right people will never need to lose you to see you.